When I first saw the job posting for a lifeguard at Willow Lake Campground, it felt like the answer to everything I needed. Steady work, fresh air, a break from the city's chaos. Summers had always been my favorite time, and the idea of spending days watching over campers, swimming alongside forests and open skies, sounded almost too good to be true. I was 22, just out of college and desperate for a new start. The campsite was only a few hours away from my hometown, remote enough to feel like an escape, but close enough to promise safety. I told myself I'd be breathed in by the wilderness, not swallowed whole by whatever waited beneath. The first day felt like a dream at first. The sun was high and bright, dappling through the thick leaves overhead. When I arrived, the lake stretched like glass, its surface mirroring the cottony white clouds drifting lazily above. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, pure and clean. People were setting up tents, kids ran between picnic tables, and the older lifeguards moved through camp with easy familiarity. They nodded at me casually, but there was a flicker of something behind their eyes, something cautious, like they were hiding a secret beneath the cheer. The camp manager, a grizzled man named Henry, was waiting in a small office tucked near the waterfront. He had a weather-beaten face, freckles scattered across his nose like a constellation, and eyes that didn't quite meet mine when we spoke. "Welcome to Willow Lake," he said, voice rough but warm enough. "You'll find it's a beautiful place, but there are rules that keep everyone safe." His gaze flicked to a crumpled piece of paper on the desk. With a sigh, he pulled it toward me and unfolded it carefully. A list titled Safety and Conduct Rules. The paper was thick, stained in places, with neat but fading handwriting that looked decades old. I read through the rules one by one, each seeming normal at first. Wear a whistle, watch the kids, enforce the no swimming signs. Then they got strange. Never swim alone, even if the shore looks empty. Always wear the whistle, no matter what. Never enter the water after sundown, no exceptions. Do not respond to voices calling from the lake. If you see a child near the water after dark, leave immediately and report to management. Do not acknowledge floating lights or objects drifting toward shore. I looked up, eyebrows furrowed. Are these new or some kind of safety briefing? Henry rubbed the back of his neck. Old camp tradition mostly, he said, eyes clouding. Some campers, some lifeguards, they don't always follow. Keeps things calm when everyone remembers what's important. I pushed the paper toward him. So has there been trouble? Incidents? He shook his head slowly, voice dropping an octave. More like disappearances. For years, people vanish near the water. Sometimes campers, sometimes staff. No sound, no trace. Just gone. We don't talk about it much. Just follow the rules. The air around us seemed to thicken. I zipped the windbreaker closed a little tighter, feeling a chill despite the warmth of the day. Throughout the afternoon, I watched the lake from my post. Children's laughter mingled with the call of birds, and the water gleamed like a mirror. But every now and then, a ripple broke the surface without cause, a slight shiver that didn't fit with the calm. I caught a whispered conversation between two lifeguards sitting near the snack shack. I couldn't hear all the words, but phrases like after sundown, never alone, and the lake watches floated to me carried on the breeze. I wanted to ask more, but I didn't want to be that newbie who stirred up old fears. That evening, just as the sky began to soften to gold and lavender, the campsite grew quieter. Shadows stretched long, and the woods surrounding the lake took on a shape I didn't like, a creeping, hungry feeling that something was waiting just beyond the tree line. I stood at the shore, whistle around my neck, eyes scanning the water. The last campers were pulling themselves from the shallow spots, and the sunset painted the lake in deep oranges and purples. The rules echoed in my head, a chant now. Never enter the water after sundown. Do not respond to voices calling from the lake. From somewhere in the distance came a soft sound, like a child laughing or calling a name. I spun around, heart pounding. but all I saw were empty trees swaying in the faint breeze. I wasn't sure if it was the wind or something else. That night, back at my cabin, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my bones. The laughter haunted my dreams, weaving itself into rippling shadows and whispering voices that felt both inviting and threatening. I flipped open the rules again, tracing the lines with a finger and promising myself I'd follow them exactly. Because Willow Lake wasn't just another summer job, it was a place with secrets, and already I feared I was being pulled into its depths. Tomorrow begins my first night patrol, alone by the lake, under a moon that watches too closely. The first night shift at Willow Lake was nothing like I expected. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky began to deepen from warm peach to bruised purple, the campsite felt different, like it was holding its breath. Shadows stretched hungrily across the water, which had lost its daytime sparkle and now sat dark and still, swallowing the last bits of daylight. I was on my own, or at least that's what I told myself as I pulled on my jacket, clipped my whistle tightly around my neck, and stepped out toward the guard station near the water's edge. The other lifeguards had finished their daytime shifts and headed for their own cabins or the little campfire circles, where hushed conversations drifted up like smoke. Henry's last words at the start of the day echoed in my ears. "Never enter the water after sundown. No exceptions." I thought about that rule for a while, and not just because it sounded like a safety precaution. Something about it felt like it was more than that. The way he'd said it, the way the other lifeguards glanced toward the lake when they mentioned it in passing. I took my post, the platform standing a good 5 feet above the shore, offering views across the dark ripples, the distant lights of tents lining the wood's edges. The campfire embers glowed like dying stars. The air was colder than it had been all day, damp with the lake's mist. The only sound was the faint lapping of water against the shore, and the occasional rustle of leaves as some unseen animal scuttled in the underbrush. I checked my watch. 9:13 p.m. The rules said campers weren't allowed near the water after dark. Anyone I spotted out there was supposed to be reported immediately, but I spotted no one yet. Just the cold, quiet lake reflecting a moon half covered by thin clouds. I leaned forward on the wooden railing and scanned the surface. For a while, the lake was utterly still, like a black mirror reflecting the heavens above. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted it. 2 tiny flickers, low over the far shore, just above the water's edge. Pale lights, hovering close to the surface, drifting slowly in a way that no human or animal could manage. My heart hit a sudden high drumbeat. Did a camper leave a flashlight by accident? A lantern? I squinted. The lights weren't normal at all. They fluttered faintly, like will-o'-the-wisps, shimmering with an almost ethereal glow. I remembered the rules again. Do not acknowledge floating lights or objects drifting toward shore. I swallowed whatever panic I felt and forced myself to look away, frowning at the whistle hanging from my neck. I glanced over my shoulder. The forest loomed, black and dense, and the only sound beyond the water was a distant, lonely bird call. After a while, the lights vanished, as suddenly as they'd appeared, leaving the far shore in total darkness. That's when the voices started. Soft, whispering, carried across the water and tangled in the trees. Sounds too faint for me to pick out words, but close enough to chill my skin. I gripped the whistle and called out several times, but no answers came, only the faint echo of wind in the pines. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was my imagination, the wind weaving ghost stories where none existed. But deep down I knew the lake wasn't just water and trees. It was something older, something that watched when no one looked. After pacing the guard platform for what felt like hours, my eyes caught movement at the tree line, a flicker of shadow just beyond the safety of the lighted campground. I fixed my gaze there, heart thrumming, but the shadow slipped back into the trees before I could get a good look. I stepped down from the platform, boots crunching quietly on gravel as I moved along the shoreline. The water's surface was darker and calmer than ever, like a sheet of obsidian glass stretched taut beneath the moonlight. Then, as I neared a cluster of reeds bending in the breeze, the surface rippled, not because something swam beneath, but because the lake itself seemed to be breathing. I blinked, leaning closer, when I heard it loud and clear, the faintest sound of laughter, childlike, distant, but unmistakable. "Is someone there?" I called, voice cracking with a mix of dread and curiosity. No response, just the water swaying gently. My skin prickled, and I took a step back. The whistle felt heavier around my neck. Suddenly, the air grew colder, as if the night itself had slipped on a dark cloak. I glanced back to see my breath fogging in the chill, and then, from deep beneath the water, where the moon's light failed to reach, something moved. A face, or maybe just a shape, pale with eyes gleaming like drowned stars. It flickered into view for a heartbeat. A child's face, eyes wide, mouth opening to call out. I jumped back, gasping, heart racing. Remembering the rule again. Do not respond to voices calling from the lake. Still, the part of me trained to save and protect wanted to reach in, to help, but I didn't. I turned away and hurried back toward the guard stand as fast as I could. The mist was rising, thick now, swirling low over the ground like smoke spilling from some unseen fire, and I swore, just for a moment, I saw other shapes beneath the surface, faces pressed against an invisible pane watching. I climbed back into the post and locked the door behind me. My hands shook. I blew the whistle once, sharp, loud, echoing across the dark waters. No response, only silence, thick and unyielding. The rest of my shift passed in heavy silence. I kept the flashlight trained on the water, watching for any movement. When dawn finally cracked the horizon with muted blues and pinks, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That first night had been full of strange sights and sounds I couldn't explain, and a heavy knowledge that the lake was more than just a body of water. It was alive and watching. As I packed up to leave my post, the sun's early light softened the terrifying memories, but I knew the unease would follow me back to camp. The strange lights on the far shore, the whispering voices, the pale face in the water, all of it too real to ignore. Henry was waiting near the office, his eyes somber when he saw me. "You did your first night," he said quietly. "Yeah," I whispered. "It's different." He nodded slowly. "Most don't last long." I forced a smile, trying to ignore the chill still clinging beneath my skin. "Remember the rules," he added, voice low. "They're older than the camp itself." I nodded, clutching the whistle. Somehow I already knew I needed every one of them. "Tomorrow, I'll read those rules again, line by line. Because this job isn't just about watching the water, it's about surviving it." The morning after my first night patrol, I woke with a dry mouth and a knot tangled in my chest that wouldn't ease. The strange things I'd seen and heard, the flickering lights, whispered voices, the pale face beneath the water, were no longer just fragments of fear or tired imagination. They were real, and more importantly, they were important. I found myself staring at that folded piece of paper Henry had given me. The list of rules. It had been crumpled from use, the edges worn, the ink faded in places. Yet it was the only thing grounding me to what was real in a job that felt like the beginning of something deeper, darker. I pulled the sheet from my jacket pocket and unfolded it again, feeling the coarse texture between my fingers. The rules weren't just guidelines, they were warnings. More than that, they felt like an unspoken contract with the lake itself. I began reading aloud, my voice steady but low, like reciting a prayer. Rule 1. Never swim alone, even if the shore looks empty. It sounded like common sense, but I'd already caught myself squinting over the dark water, willing anyone to join me, any friendly face to break the silence. The lake was deceptively calm, and more than once I'd felt its stillness swallow me whole. I pictured the stories the lifeguards whispered in that shadowed snack shack. Jonas wandered off that way. Maggie didn't come back. Faint names lost in memory. Names of those who didn't make it because some had ignored this rule. Rule 2. Always wear the whistle, no matter what. Henry had stressed this when handing me the uniform. The whistle is my lifeline, my only voice when the lake falls silent. But on that first night, it barely felt like mine. It weighed heavily around my neck, pressing a cold warning against my throat. The moments I wanted to blow it the most were the moments when silence stretched so thick it seemed to eat sound itself. Rule 3. Never enter the water after sundown. No exceptions. This was the one I'd broken, almost in my mind. Chasing the soft laughter drifting just beyond sight, leaning toward the pale face I glimpsed beneath the surface. The lake transformed after dark. Its depths hid secrets that hadn't seen sunlight in centuries. Even Henry's grim tone had hinted this rule wasn't about safety from drowning. It was about the things that lurk beneath. Rule 4. Do not respond to voices calling from the lake. That chilling rule settled like frost on my skin. The sound I heard that night was not the wind, not the wildlife. It was something else. Childlike, pleading, but hollow. The voice of something trapped, or worse, something waiting. I clenched my fists, thinking about how easy it would be to answer, to wade in, push past the chill, stretch a hand toward the water's cold grip, to die believing I was saving someone. Rule 5. If you see a child near the water after dark, leave immediately and report to management. Not just unusual, a direct command to abandon any rescue instinct. I hadn't seen anyone after dark, not yet, but the thought of a child wandering those shores unseen was like a knife twisting in my gut. I wondered how many campers Henry had meant when he said some never came back. How many were tempted by the lake's whispers and vanished without a trace. Rule 6. Do not acknowledge floating lights or objects drifting toward shore. The first night's will-o'-the-wisp lights drifted just at the edge of sight, teasing and taunting. The rule didn't explain what they were, only warned away from them. With a shiver, I guessed they weren't lost flashlights or harmless glimmers. They were bait. I closed my eyes and tried to push away the memories. That uneasy glow, the way each ripple seemed too deliberate, like a lure promising salvation but trailing cold claws beneath. The rules, I told myself, are the only way to survive. Later that day, I found a few minutes to wander around the camp alone. Voices and laughter still echoed in the distance, but near the lake, a thick quiet had settled. The trees stood as silent sentinels, their limbs twisting like ancient fingers reaching toward a sky I barely saw. The ground was soft underfoot, and the water's edge looked innocent in the morning light. But I knew better. Somewhere beneath, something waited. At the snack shack, I overheard two lifeguards in low conversation. They didn't notice me listening. Greg caught the shadow again last fall, right near the west dock. Yeah, shape of a child. No face, just eyes. They say if you stare too long, you don't come back. I swallowed hard, returning the rules to my pocket and tightening my grip on the whistle dangling there. That night, as I tried to sleep, memories of the pale face beneath the water slithered into my thoughts. Was it a ghost? A monster? Or something else entirely? Something bound to that dark lake like some forgotten curse. I knew the rules weren't just warnings. They were shields, fragile lines drawn between real life and whatever darkness lingered in Willow Lake's depths. And the deeper I got into the job, the clearer one truth became. Breaking those rules wasn't just dangerous. It could be deadly. Tomorrow I would read them again, memorize them even harder, and live by them. Because once the lake calls you, it never really lets go. And I'm only just beginning to understand what that means. I told myself I wouldn't break the rules. I repeated them over and over like a mantra as I prepared for my second night shift at Willow Lake. Never enter the water after sundown. No exceptions. It felt like the one rule that held all the others together. Like a lock on a door you pray never opens. But rules, it turns out, are fragile things when your instincts scream otherwise. That night began like the first. Still, quiet, and oppressive in the way only a dark lake can be. The moon was a thin crescent struggling to pierce a veil of clouds, and a stiff breeze rattled the tree branches. I was pacing the guard stand, eyes fixed on the expanse of black water. My whistle rested heavily against my throat, but tonight it felt useless. After hours of silence, the lake itself seemed to pulse beneath the surface, breathing slow and deep in rhythms I couldn't understand. Then I heard it, a soft splash near the far dock. My heart leapt into my throat. At first I thought it was a raccoon or some late-night wildlife, but as the sound repeated, deliberate, slow, steady, I knew it wasn't natural. A child's voice, faint and trembling, whispered through the fog around the lake. "Help! Please!" I froze, torn between fear and responsibility. I gripped my flashlight and scanned the shoreline. The dim beam caught the water's edge, but nothing else stirred. No campers, no silhouettes. Only the ripples where something or someone had broken the surface. The whistle in my hand felt worthless. The rules echoed in my mind, but so did the sound of that voice begging and pleading, fraying my will to follow orders. Part of me gathered courage. The training drilled into me to be the protector, the lifeguard who saves lives no matter what. But the lake's cold breath curled around me like a warning. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the voice as a trick of the wind or my imagination. But then I saw it, a small figure, just on the edge of visibility, bobbed in the water near the reeds, a child's silhouette, faint and translucent beneath the moonlight. I swallowed hard. The whistle suddenly felt heavier. The rules rang clearer. Never enter the water after sundown. That voice could have been callous trickery, a lure, but the instinct to act, to save, roared louder. I glanced down at my uniform. The whistle glinted under the fading light. I thought about Henry's warning about the things beneath the lake, how this wasn't about drowning, but something older, hungrier. Still, I couldn't just leave. Steeling myself, I unstrapped the flashlight, clipped the whistle back on, and pulled off my jacket. I slid carefully down the ladder from the platform. The cold air hit my skin, prickling as I stepped onto the cool sand. Each footfall toward the water felt heavier than the last. I stepped in. The water's surface was glassy and unnervingly still. A chill snaked up from the depths, seizing my muscles in ice that crept through every vein. A chill snaked up from the depths, seizing my muscles in ice that crept through every vein. Below me, the figure remained, bobbing, waiting. I called out softly, "Are you okay? Can you swim? Where are your parents?" No answer, only the faint lap of water against my legs. As I pushed further in, the water climbed past my knees, then higher. My skin began to crawl. The child's face was still just beneath the surface, pale, too pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to glint with a strange, unnatural light. I wanted to reach out, but before I could, the water rippled violently, as if something big stirred beneath. The surface broke with a long, eerie sigh, and a shadow stretched out from the reeds. It wasn't the child. It was something else, formless, dark, moving with a smoothness no fish or mammal could rival. My heart hammered against my ribs. The cold sucked the air from my lungs, and 1,000 whispers rushed past my ears. Broken words, half-remembered names, breathless warnings. Instinct screamed, "Get out!" I turned, breaking into a frantic swim toward shore. The water closed around me like a vice, cold as death, thick and suffocating. Every stroke was a battle against invisible hands dragging at my legs. I yelled for help, long, piercing, but the whistle was gone, lost when I shed my jacket. Silence swallowed me. My lungs burned. Finally, I burst through the surface and scrambled onto the shore, gasping, drenched, shivering uncontrollably. I didn't stop running until the wooden steps of the guard platform were beneath my feet, and my hands found the warm grip of my whistle around my neck again. I blew it as hard as I could. The sharp blast echoed into the night. Nothing answered, just the eerie stillness of the lake, lapping softly like a predator waiting for the weak. Back in the guard station, I sat shaking like a leaf in a storm. My hands trembled as I thumbed through the rules again. Never enter the water after sundown. Do not respond to voices calling from the lake. I had broken both, but I had survived, at least for now. That night, the bruise appeared. On my wrist, a dark purple crescent, shaped like a handprint, cold to the touch as if frozen. I pressed my fingers over it, and a low hum filled the room like a distant chant. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead, the whispers filled my dreams, the same soft voice begging, the water rising, the darkness waiting. When dawn finally brightened the sky, I called Henry. His voice was cold and clipped when he answered. "You broke Rule 3, he said quietly, "and you're lucky to be alive." I asked what I was up against, what the lake really was. "Old things," he replied. "Creatures bound to the waters since before this camp existed. The rules aren't just for show. If you break them, you invite the depths inside you." He warned me again to never enter the water after dark. I promised I wouldn't, but deep down, I knew the lake had marked me. Something was watching, waiting, and the darkness beneath the surface was far from done with me. The next shift would bring new challenges. One of them, I realized with a sinking feeling, might be me. The night air was heavier than usual, thick and clammy like wet stone pressed against my skin. The last few days since I broke Rule 3 had blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and dread. Sleep was a distant memory, chased away by dreams filled with soft whispers, water crawling over my face and hidden eyes opening beneath the lake's surface. But nothing prepared me for what happened that night. I was barely halfway through my shift when the camp's radio crackled, the voice frantic, nearly breaking apart with panic. "Lifeguard! Lifeguard! We're missing a camper. Last seen near the North Shore. Went off alone. Please send help." My heart slammed into my ribs like a frantic drum. The North Shore was farther than I'd ever patrolled at night, a stretch wrapped thick in reeds and shadow. It was exactly the place the rules warned me away from, especially after sundown. I grabbed my flashlight and the radio with trembling hands. "On my way," I whispered, already pulling my jacket closer against the chill. The lake was a black mirror, dotted only by faint stars and distant tent lights. A thin fog crept low over the water, curling around the trees in pale fingers. My footsteps were muffled on the damp earth as I ran. I called the camper's name softly, but only the breeze answered. The closer I got to the shore, the heavier the silence became, a silence so complete it pressed into my ears, filling every empty space. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement just beyond the reeds, a pale face peering through the shadows. A child. A moment's relief flooded through me. This was what I was trained for rescuing, protecting. But as I called out, the figure vanished with unnatural speed, dissolving like smoke caught in a gust. I hesitated, torn between following and obeying the rules that hammered in my mind. Never enter the water after sundown. If you see a child near the water after dark, leave immediately and report. But the instinct to save clawed louder than the warnings. The water lapped at my boots, glittering under my flashlight's beam. The shoreline curved away into blackness, and a cold draft swept across the trees, carrying a faint, chilling melody hidden beneath the whispering wind. I stepped in. The water was icy, colder than anything I'd felt that summer. It wasn't just cold, it was as if the lake was sucking the heat from my very bones. The child's face appeared again, this time beneath the surface, distorted, twisted by the water's glassy veil, eyes wide and pleading, lips moving soundlessly. A voice echoed softly beneath the waves, a haunting whisper that scraped against the edges of my mind. "Help me!" I swallowed hard, every fiber of my being screaming to swim deeper, to reach for the lost soul calling out to me. But as I waded in, the world around me shifted. Colors bled into shadows. The water darkened, swallowing light whole. Beneath the surface, the lake was a labyrinth, a place where reflections tangled and twisted like webs. Shapes flickered just beyond reach, faces pale and hollow, hands reaching with fingers long and bent. The child's voice grew louder. The figure slipped beneath me, beckoning. I dove. Cold wrapped around me like chains, squeezing, pulling me toward depths that felt impossibly ancient. A sudden pressure crushed my chest, stealing my breath, and I kicked desperately upward. The water resisted like a living thing, thick with unseen eyes watching, waiting. As I broke through the surface, gasping and spluttering, I caught sight of a shadow beneath me, a figure less human and more like a memory carved from darkness. It lingered with a terrible hunger, silent except for the soft hum that emanated from its presence. I scrambled back to shore, my legs weak, heart hammering. Back on solid ground, I slumped against a tree, trembling. I glanced down at my hands, water dripped from my fingertips like ink, staining my skin cold and strange. In the distance, faint lights bobbed on the water, those same ethereal orbs, drifting lazily like wayward spirits. I knew they were watching. The next hours blurred as I radioed for backup, pacing near the campfire's dying embers, my mind a chaos of fear and questions I couldn't face aloud. Why had the child appeared to me? What was the whisper beneath the ice-cold surface? And what exactly lurked beneath the deceptive calm of Willow Lake? The truth came the next morning. Henry found me near the docks, eyes heavy and weary. They aren't campers, he said gravely, voice low like sharing a sacred secret. The ones we lose, the faces that call from the water, they're trapped souls, bound to the lake by something old and broken. Something like a curse? I dared ask. He nodded. It's worse. The lake itself is a prison and a predator. I swallowed hard. There's a ritual, Henry continued, voice strained. A way to contain the darkness and keep it tethered. It's why we follow the rules, why no one goes in after dark. It's a balance fragile and dangerous. He studied me, eyes keen. Sometimes the trapped try to reach out, to pull someone into their depths, to free themselves. But the cost is high. The lake takes more than it ever gives back. I spent the day turning his words over like cold stones in my mouth. The camp's peaceful summer facade was a thin veil stretched over an ancient nightmare that thrived beneath the surface, and I was now tangled in its threads. That night, lying awake in bed, clutching the crumpled rules, I realized I had two choices. I could walk away, leave the job and the darkness to someone else, or I could face the lake's whispers, the frozen hands beneath the water, and fight to keep the balance even if it meant wrestling monsters I barely understood. Because whether I wanted it or not, the lake had chosen me, and it wasn't done with its game. The rules didn't just protect campers from drowning. They were fences holding a deeper terror at bay. And sometimes, I thought, as the wind rattled my cabin windows, those fences break. After the forbidden swim, everything changed. The lake no longer felt like a place to watch from a safe distance. It had become a living, choking presence, coiling tighter around my every thought. The bruise on my wrist throbbed, pulsing like a heartbeat I couldn't escape. Every time I touched it, I felt the cold crawl beneath my skin, a reminder that what had seen me in those depths wasn't finished yet. The next morning, I barely slept. The dark shapes beneath the surface haunted my dreams, faces beckoning with hollow eyes, hands stretched out in silent pleas, and whispers tangled in the wind. Finally, I sought Henry out. He was sitting alone on the broken bench near the docks when I found him, his weathered face even more drawn than usual. He didn't need to ask why I was there. His eyes, shadowed beneath heavy brows, held the weight of too many secrets. "We don't talk about it much," he said softly after a long silence. "But you felt it now, the lake's pull. It's older than this camp, older than any of us, and it's hungry." I swallowed hard, gripping the crumpled rules in my hand like a lifeline. "What is it?" I whispered. Henry's gaze drifted toward the water, where the sun glinted off the restless surface. "The lake holds spirits, souls of those who vanished here long ago. It traps them, feeds on their fear and hope, and binds them to its depths. The lights you saw drifting, Those are their lanterns, their cries for help. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Why? I asked. Because what lies beneath isn't just water and mud, he said. It's a prison and a predator. The lake's bound by an ancient curse, a reminder of something wrong, something broken. I thought about the faces under the water, the child's voice calling to me, the cold grip dragging me under. There's a way to contain it, he continued, lowering his voice to a near whisper. A ritual, one that was passed down by the camp's founders. It's why the rules exist, to keep the darkness tethered. The whistle, the watches, the no swimming after sundown, each part is a thread holding the lake's evil in check. My fingers trembled around the paper, realizing how fragile that thread was, how easily it had frayed when I broke the rules. And if the thread snaps? Henry looked away, his face grim. If the ritual's broken, even once, the darkness grows stronger. It reaches out, claiming more souls. The trapped don't just fade away, they pull others down with them. A cold wind rustled the trees as if echoing his words. I imagined those lost souls, swirling beneath the surface, endless and hungry. But what can I do? I asked. How do I fix this? Henry's eyes burned with tired hope. You don't fix it alone. The ritual requires a guardian, someone who understands the lake, respects the rules, and walks the line between this world and whatever waits beneath. Suddenly, the weight of the lifeguard's role pressed down on me like never before. You want me to be that guardian? I whispered, voice barely steady. He nodded. They chose you when you survived that swim. The lake marked you. You hold part of it now. You can either run or face it. I looked at my wrist. The bruise was fading, but the cold burn lingered. Fear yawned in my chest, but so did a strange resolve. That night, the lake was quieter than I'd ever seen, but the mist still rolled low, curling like dark fingers over the shore. I stood on the dock under the sickle moon, wind tugging at my clothes and rustling the trees, and I drew the whistle from around my neck. The air thickened as I raised it to my lips, the familiar leather strap cold against my skin. Blow. The sharp, piercing note sliced through the silence and strode across the water. From beneath the surface, the ripples stirred. Soft lights flickered below, like stars caught in a glass sea. I closed my eyes and spoke the old words Henry taught me, the chant passed down through generations, binding the spirits to rest. By water's edge and whispered breath, by lantern light and ancient death, I bind the depths and hold the night, till morning breaks with golden light. The water shimmered, rising in faint spirals, the ghostly lights pulsing in rhythm. The cold on my wrist flared, then eased, as if the lake acknowledged the ritual. A hush fell over the woods. For a moment, I felt connected to the lost souls, to the lake, to the unseen world that mirrored our own. But as the last echoes of the chant died away, I realized the truth. This was temporary. The lake's hunger was endless, its prisoners countless, and my role as guardian was not a shield against the darkness, but a fragile, weary watchtower perched on the edge of oblivion. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I had no choice. The rules weren't just lines on paper. They were the difference between life and a fate swallowed whole. As dawn crept in pale over the trees, I made my way back to camp. The early birds' song strangely brittle, as if even they feared what lay beneath. The lake whispered still. Soft voices carried on the breeze, and I knew this was only the beginning. The darkness waits beneath the waters of Willow Lake, and I'm its reluctant sentinel. The days after the ritual felt like walking on a razor's edge. The bruise on my wrist had faded to a faint discoloration, but the cold pulse beneath my skin was a constant reminder that the lake's grip hadn't loosened, only shifted, waiting for the next moment of weakness. Henry pulled me aside that afternoon, his eyes dark beneath his heavy brows, his voice quieter than ever. "There's something you need to know," he said. "A warning left by those who came before us, lifeguards, who learned the hard way. We stood near the dock, where the water gleamed dark and still beneath a mass of gathering storm clouds. The wind tugged at Henry's jacket, and the lake's surface rippled unnaturally, as if listening. "The camp's founder, Silas Harrow," he started, "left a final rule decades ago. It wasn't on the list you got, not in writing, but it's the most important one of all." I felt a chill race down my spine. Henry swallowed before continuing. "If you survive a breach of the water's law, a forbidden swim, a broken rule, you must never return to the lake." I blinked. "You said before that the Guardian Watch keeps the lake bound." "Yes," he nodded gravely. "But once you cross certain lines, once the lake marks you and you survive, you become tied to something else entirely." He lowered his voice, eyes sharp and tired. "Some lifeguards who broke the rules disappeared shortly afterward. Some were found months later, changed, distant, hollow, and some never came back." My throat went dry. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Heard rumors," Henry answered with a bitter laugh. "About you, about the swim, about the mark. You're no longer the new guy who's learning to keep watch. You're someone who's felt the darkness firsthand. And if you go back now, you don't just put yourself at risk. You risk becoming part of the lake's story, its next whispering face beneath the surface." I swallowed, remembering the pale face in the water, the temptations of those ethereal lights floating just out of reach. "But if I don't return," Henry's gaze darkened like storm clouds gathering overhead. "The camp needs a guardian, someone who understands the rules and the balance, walks the line between our world and the deep." His voice dropped. "That's the true burden, not just watching campers, but standing guard against what waits in the depths. You either accept it, or the lake claims you, or worse, it claims someone else." I thought about the missing campers, the lifeguards who vanished, the whispered legends breathed under breath around campfires. "I need time." "You don't," Henry said flatly. "The longer you wait, the weaker the line gets, the more strength the dark gains." That night, the storm came. The sky grumbled low and fierce, wind shaking the trees as if angry at some ancient debt. I stood by the lake's edge, bathed in the harsh flashes of lightning that cut through the dark like knives. The water churned wildly beneath the thunderous sky, waves like hands clawing at the shore. And then, the whispers returned. Not distant this time, but close voices carried on the wind, swirling around me like 1,000 unseen spirits calling out to be freed. I closed my eyes, the cold wind biting my face. In my mind, the lake was no longer just water. It was a living thing, hungry, patient, ancient beyond reckoning. It was waiting for me to decide. Could I walk away? Could I leave this nightmare behind and let the darkness grow unchecked? Or could I stay, fight the endless night beneath the surface and take on the Guardian's mantle? I thought of the rules. They weren't just guidelines anymore. They were the last defense the world had against the lake's eternal hunger. Lightning struck, illuminating the lake's surface like a shattering mirror. In that flash, I saw the faces pale, hollow-eyed, watching. Some familiar, some I could never forget. I took a deep breath and pulled the whistle to my lips. The sharp, piercing note cut through the storm, a beacon in the oppressive night. From beneath the churning water, flashes of light appeared, flickering lanterns bobbing like spirits trapped just beyond reach. The storm echoed their song. I knew then what I had to do. I was no longer just a lifeguard. I was the line, the fragile, trembling line between the campers' worlds and the eternal darkness waiting beneath. As the wind howled and the first drops of rain fell heavy and cold, I whispered the chant Henry taught me once more. By water's edge and whispered breath, by lantern light and ancient death, I bind the depths and hold the night, till morning breaks with golden light. The lake's hunger didn't disappear, it only recoiled, waiting for the next shadow, the next broken rule. And me, I was caught between the rules, the whispers, and the choice no new lifeguard ever wants to face. Walk away and be forever marked by what you left behind, or stay and pay the price to keep survivors safe. The final warning was clear. There is no true escape from Willow Lake, only survival, and the rules. I left Willow Lake Campground the morning after my final night on duty, but the lake didn't leave me. The early dawn was cold and misty, a river of fog clinging to the trees and winding along the empty roads. I didn't say goodbye to Henry, didn't look back at the shadowed entrance of the camp. I just drove, headlights cutting through the thick morning gloom as if fleeing a nightmare that clung to my skin. For weeks afterward, I told myself it was over. The ritual, the chant, the awful guardianship had broken the curse, or at least bought me some peace. But Willow Lake has a way of following you, like a storm that never really passes. The bruises faded from my wrist, but traces of cold lingered beneath my skin. My dreams became haunted by water, dragging me beneath waves that swallowed the sky. I woke to soft taps on my window, measured and deliberate. 3 taps. Every night, never fewer, never more. I would lay frozen, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the glass. But when I finally dared to look, there was nothing. No footprints in the dew-damp grass. No reflection of a face, just the dark lull of the lake's call pressing outside. At home, the strange coincidences began. Boxes of odd, damp wood and driftwood drifted onto my porch, gifts without sender or note. For days, a faint scent of pine and cold water clung to my clothes and hair no matter how often I washed. And sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, I thought I heard a child's laugh echoing on the breeze. Not real, and yet impossible to ignore. I tried to reach out to the old lifeguards, the ones rumored to have disappeared or changed. Their numbers were silent, their addresses abandoned. Only one reply came, a cryptic message left on my phone, glinting with static. The lake remembers. Friends and family began mentioning odd things too. They spoke of shadows flickering by the edge of my vision, or fleeting glimpses of figures standing just beyond fences and tree lines on quiet nights. When I turned, there was only emptiness, until moments later, the same chilling feeling crept over me like an icy tide. I started skipping mirrors, not because I feared my reflection, but because sometimes the edges of the glass would ripple, as if the surface itself was a portal, and just beyond, pale faces pressed against an unseen wall, flickering in and out. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself walking to the edge of a nearby pond, tiny and insignificant compared to Willow Lake, but somehow the pull was the same. I stood at its edge, breath misting the cool air, and for a moment the surface shimmered, a faint flicker of those flickering, ghostly lights bobbing beneath. I blinked and staggered backward. The lake at Willow Lake was never far, just hidden behind walls and time. I found myself spending nights listening to the wind, to the water dripping down gutters, to the soft humming of shadows that no one else heard. The job was supposed to be temporary, a summer gig, a way to pay the bills and find myself. Instead, it became a doorway, a curse, and the rules, the strange, ancient rules I'd sworn to obey, were never meant to keep me safe. They were meant to keep the lake's hunger at bay, to bind the restless spirits trapped between water and light. I learned too late that some jobs choose you, that some places grip your soul and never let go, that the peace of the lake's surface can hide a storm beneath, one hungry, endless, and patient. If you ever find yourself near Willow Lake Campground at night, near dark waters reflecting moonlight like broken glass, remember the rules. Never swim alone. Always wear your whistle. Do not respond to voices calling from the lake. Never enter the water after sundown. If you see a child near the water at night, leave immediately and report it. And above all, if you hear 3 slow taps at your window, don't look, don't answer, run. Because some nights, the lake comes calling, and if you listen, it will never let you go. I still see those flickering lights sometimes, in the corner of my eye, on restless nights when the wind is heavy and the world feels thin. I never know if I'm dreaming or awake. The lake waits, and it remembers. Willow Lake Campground is still there, still beautiful, still deadly. And sometimes, when the darkness falls soft and still, I wonder if the next lifeguard can hear the whispers, the voices just beneath the water, if they'll follow the rules, or become the next face pressed behind the glass. The lake doesn't care. It never did, because some deliveries never end, and some guardians never leave. If you ever hear the lake calling after dark, don't answer. Just run, and pray you hear only silence in return.